During the divorce asset split, my wife laughed with her expensive lawyer. "You won't get a single penny after this meeting." Her lover nodded. "That's right, darling." And her cousin laughed loudly. "He'll die alone and broke." But when the judge opened my envelope and saw the video, he couldn't stop laughing. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Clifford, and at 66 years old, I never imagined I'd be sitting in a divorce attorney's office, watching my wife of 35 years laugh at my misery. But there I was, gripping the arms of that uncomfortable leather chair, listening to Kimberly's expensive lawyer outline exactly how she planned to leave me with nothing. "Mr. Henderson will receive his personal clothing and perhaps his old fishing gear," Attorney Morrison said with a smirk that matched my wife's perfectly. "Everything else, the house, the investments, the retirement accounts, all of it goes to Mrs. Henderson." Kimberly couldn't contain her satisfaction. She actually giggled, a sound that once made my heart flutter, but now felt like nails on a chalkboard. Sitting beside her was Martin, her lover, his hand possessively placed on her knee. He was 20 years younger than both of us, with perfectly styled hair and a suit that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security would be. "You're not going to have a single penny left after this meeting," Kimberly said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. She turned to Martin with that same adoring look she used to give me. "Isn't that right, honey?" Martin nodded, his smile cold and calculating. "That's exactly right, sweetheart. Old Clifford here is going to learn what it means to be truly alone." But the worst part wasn't Martin's cruelty, or even Kimberly's betrayal. It was when Rachel, Kimberly's cousin, burst into loud laughter from the corner where she'd been quietly observing. "He's going to die alone without any money," she cackled, slapping her knee like this was the funniest joke she'd ever heard. I felt something die inside me at that moment. These weren't strangers mocking me. These were people I'd considered family. Rachel had spent countless holidays at our dinner table. I'd helped her through her own divorce 10 years ago, lending her $5,000 she never repaid. Martin had eaten meals I'd cooked, slept in the guest room I'd personally renovated. My throat felt tight, and I had to swallow hard to keep my composure. The humiliation burned in my chest like acid. Here I was, a man who'd worked 43 years as a maintenance supervisor, who'd never missed a day of work until my heart attack 2 years ago, being treated like garbage by people who'd never known real hardship. "The prenuptial agreement is ironclad," Morrison continued, shuffling through papers with theatrical efficiency. "Mr. Henderson signed away any rights to marital property acquired during the marriage." I remembered signing that document 35 years ago, young and stupidly in love, thinking it was just a formality. Kimberly had convinced me it was something her wealthy father insisted on, just a precaution that would never matter because we'd be together forever. Forever. The word tasted bitter now. Kimberly leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs with satisfaction. "Clifford always was too trusting," she said to Martin, speaking about me like I wasn't even there. "It made him easy to manage all these years." Easy to manage. Is that what 35 years of marriage had been to her? Management. I thought about all those years I'd worked double shifts to pay for her shopping trips, the vacation home in Florida she'd insisted we needed, the expensive dinners with her friends where I'd smile and nod while they talked about things I couldn't afford. I'd sacrificed my own dreams, turned down a promotion that would have required moving because she didn't want to leave her social circle. "There is one small matter," my court-appointed attorney said weakly. He was young, probably fresh out of law school, clearly outmatched by Morrison's experience and expensive suit. "Mr. Henderson has prepared a statement for the court." Morrison waved dismissively. "Whatever rambling goodbye speech he's prepared won't change the legal facts." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a manila envelope, my hands surprisingly steady despite the storm raging inside me. Everyone in the room assumed it contained some desperate plea, some pathetic attempt to appeal to whatever humanity Kimberly might have left. They were wrong. "Your Honor," I said quietly, handing the envelope to Judge Watson, "I believe this information is relevant to the proceedings." Judge Watson, a stern woman in her 50s with graying hair and sharp eyes, accepted the envelope with professional courtesy. "What does this contain, Mr. Henderson?" "Evidence that changes everything about this case," I replied, my voice steadier than I'd felt in months. Kimberly's laughter faltered for just a moment. Martin shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Rachel stopped her giggling and leaned forward with curious concern, but I wasn't ready to reveal my hand yet. Let them wonder. Let them feel just a tiny fraction of the uncertainty I'd lived with since discovering their betrayal 6 months ago. The judge opened the envelope, and I watched her eyebrows rise slightly as she examined its contents. Her expression shifted from routine boredom to something much more serious. "This is quite interesting, Mr. Henderson," she said slowly, looking up at me with new respect. "Are you certain you want to present this evidence today?" "I've never been more certain of anything in my life, Your Honor." Kimberly was no longer laughing. 6 months earlier, I'd been a different man. Naive, trusting, still believing that my marriage was solid despite the growing distance between Kimberly and me. I attributed her coldness to stress, her late nights to book club meetings, her sudden interest in expensive clothes and jewelry to a midlife awakening. I should have known better. It was a Tuesday afternoon in March when my world shattered. I'd left work early because of a migraine, something that had been happening more frequently since my heart attack. Dr. Martinez had warned me about stress, about taking better care of myself, but I'd been too focused on providing for Kimberly to listen. I pulled into our driveway at 2:30 in the afternoon, surprised to see a silver BMW parked where I usually left my truck. I didn't recognize the car, but assumed it belonged to one of Kimberly's friends. She was always entertaining someone, always hosting coffee mornings or charity planning sessions. The front door was unlocked, which was unusual. Kimberly had become increasingly security conscious over the past year, always checking locks and setting the alarm. I called out as I entered, but got no response. The house felt different somehow, charged with an energy I couldn't identify. I climbed the stairs slowly, my chest still tight from the migraine. Our bedroom door was closed and I could hear voices from inside, low, intimate voices that made my stomach clench with sudden dread. I stood outside that door for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds, my hand frozen on the doorknob. Part of me knew what I'd find on the other side. Part of me had known for months, maybe years. But knowing and seeing are two different kinds of pain. When I finally turned the handle, the sight that greeted me destroyed something fundamental inside me. Kimberly was in our bed, our marriage bed, with a man I'd never seen before. They were so absorbed in each other that they didn't notice me standing there, watching the woman I'd loved for 35 years betray everything we'd built together. The man was younger, handsome in a way I'd never been. His clothes were expensive, casually draped over the chair where I usually placed my work shirts. This wasn't some spontaneous moment of weakness. This was planned, comfortable, routine. I must have made a sound, because they both turned toward me. Kimberly's face went through a series of expressions. Shock, fear, and then something that surprised me most of all, relief. "Clifford," she said, not even attempting to cover herself. "I didn't expect you home so early." The casualness of her tone, as if I'd interrupted a normal conversation rather than caught her in adultery, hit me harder than any screaming or tears would have. The man, who I'd later learn was Martin Reeves, a financial consultant she'd met at the country club, had the audacity to extend his hand. "You must be the husband," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm Martin." I stared at that outstretched hand for a long moment, my brain struggling to process the surreal politeness of the situation. Here was the man who'd been sleeping with my wife, introducing himself like we were meeting at a barbecue. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Kimberly sighed, as if my question was an inconvenience. "Does it really matter, Clifford? We both know this marriage has been over for years." "How long?" I repeated, needing to understand the scope of my blindness. 2 years, Martin answered when Kimberly remained silent. "Maybe a little longer. 2 years. While I'd been working overtime to pay for her spa treatments and shopping trips, she'd been building a life with another man. While I'd been planning our retirement, dreaming of travel and grandchildren that would never come, she'd been planning her escape. "I want him gone," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "Now." Martin looked to Kimberly, waiting for her permission. That small gesture told me everything I needed to know about who really controlled this situation. "Martin can stay as long as he wants," Kimberly said, finally sitting up and reaching for her robe. "This is my house too, Clifford. In fact, according to the prenup you signed, it's more mine than yours." The prenup, of course. I'd been so young and eager to please when I'd signed those papers, so certain that love would conquer any legal complications. Now I realized it had been a trap, carefully laid and patiently executed. We need to talk, I said, looking only at Kimberly. Alone. Martin started to protest, but Kimberly waved him quiet. It's fine, honey. Give us a few minutes. Honey. She called him honey with the same tone she'd once used for me. After Martin left, closing the bedroom door behind him with inappropriate familiarity, Kimberly stood and faced me. She looked younger somehow, more alive than she'd seemed in years. Betrayal, apparently, suited her. I'm not going to apologize, she said, crossing her arms. We haven't been happy for a long time, Clifford. You know that. I thought we were working through a rough patch, I replied. I thought we still had something worth saving. Nah, she laughed, but there was no humor in it. You thought wrong. I've been miserable for years, pretending to be satisfied with your small dreams and smaller paycheck. Martin offers me something you never could. What's that? A real life, security, excitement. He has money, Clifford, real money. He can give me the life I deserve, and the life she deserved. As if 35 years of devotion, of putting her needs before my own, of working myself into heart problems to provide for her comfort, had earned me nothing. I want a divorce, she continued. Martin's already spoken to a lawyer. You won't fight it, and you won't make it difficult, because if you do, I'll make sure you lose everything. The house, the car, even your pension. The prenup gives me that power. I felt something cold settle in my chest. This wasn't the woman I'd married, the woman who'd cried when I'd proposed, who'd promised to love me in sickness and health. This was a stranger wearing my wife's face. I see, I said simply. I hope you do see, she replied. Because if you don't, if you try to fight this, you'll end up with nothing but the clothes on your back. That night I sat in my truck in an empty parking lot, staring at my phone. I had Martin's business card, which he'd left on my kitchen counter like some kind of territorial marking. I called his office, not because I had anything to say to him, but because I needed to understand who I was dealing with. The next morning, I drove to see an attorney. Not to fight the divorce. Kimberly was right about the prenup being ironclad, but to explore my options. That's when I learned about the investigation process, about the kinds of evidence that could change everything in a legal proceeding. That's when I decided to install the security cameras. Judge Watson held the envelope in her hands like it contained something dangerous. The courtroom had fallen completely silent. Even the court reporter had stopped typing. Everyone was staring at that manila envelope, wondering what could possibly be inside that would make a seasoned judge look so serious. Mr. Henderson, Judge Watson said slowly, before I proceed with reviewing this evidence, I want to confirm that you understand the implications of what you're presenting. I nodded, my heart pounding, but my resolve stronger than ever. I understand completely, Your Honor. Kimberly was no longer the confident woman who'd been laughing minutes earlier. Her face had gone pale, and she kept glancing nervously between Martin and me. Martin himself had shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his earlier smugness replaced by something that looked like genuine concern. What could he possibly have? Rachel whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. He's just a maintenance worker. That comment stung, but not in the way she'd intended. It reminded me of exactly why I was here, why I'd spent the last 4 months carefully gathering evidence while pretending to be the broken, defeated husband they all believed me to be. Judge Watson opened the envelope and pulled out a single DVD disc and several printed documents. She examined the papers first, her eyebrows rising higher with each page. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. This appears to be security camera footage from your residence, she said, looking at me over her reading glasses. How long has this system been in operation? 4 months, Your Honor. I installed it after some break-ins in our neighborhood. I lied smoothly. There had been no break-ins, but Kimberly didn't know that. You installed cameras? Kimberly's voice cracked slightly. Since when do you know anything about security systems? I turned to look at her directly for the first time since entering the courtroom. Since I realized I needed to protect myself from the people living in my own house. Martin leaned forward aggressively. What's that supposed to mean, old man? Mr. Reeves, Judge Watson's voice cut through the tension like a blade. You are here as a guest. One more outburst, and you'll be removed from my courtroom. The judge turned back to me. Mr. Henderson, these documents suggest some very serious allegations. Are you prepared to have this footage viewed in open court? Yes, Your Honor, though I believe some portions might be better reviewed in chambers first. Morrison, Kimberly's expensive lawyer, finally found his voice. Your Honor, we object to any evidence that wasn't disclosed during discovery. This appears to be an ambush tactic. An ambush? I couldn't help but laugh, though there was no humor in it. Like the ambush I walked into when I came home early from work and found my wife in bed with another man. The courtroom erupted in whispers. This was the first time anyone had spoken openly about the adultery, though I'm sure everyone had suspected it given Martin's presence. Judge Watson banged her gavel once. "Order, Mr. Morrison. Your client failed to disclose the nature of her relationship with Mr. Reeves during previous proceedings. I think we're past worrying about ambush tactics." She inserted the DVD into her computer and angled the screen so only she could see it. The rest of us watched her face as she viewed whatever was on that disc. Her expression grew more serious with each passing minute. "Mr. Henderson," she said finally, "when you said this evidence changes everything about this case, you weren't exaggerating." Kimberly was gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles had turned white. "What's on that video?" she demanded. I stood up slowly, feeling every one of my 66 years in my bones, but also feeling stronger than I had in months. "The truth, Kimberly, something you've forgotten how to tell." The judge paused the video and looked directly at Kimberly. "Mrs. Henderson, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I advise you to think very carefully before answering. In the past 6 months, have you and Mr. Reeves ever discussed plans that might be considered harmful to your husband's health or well-being?" The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Kimberly's face went from pale to completely white. Martin started to stand up, but Judge Watson fixed him with a stare that could have frozen fire. "I don't understand the question," Kimberly stammered. "Then let me be more specific," the judge continued. "Have you and Mr. Reeves ever discussed methods of hastening your husband's death for financial gain?" The silence that followed was deafening. Rachel's mouth fell open. Morrison looked like he wanted to disappear into his expensive suit. Even my own court-appointed attorney was staring at me with newfound respect. "That's ridiculous," Martin said, his voice higher than usual. "We would never—" "Mr. Reeves," Judge Watson interrupted, "I strongly suggest you remain silent until you've consulted with an attorney." I felt a strange calm settle over me. For months, I'd carried the weight of what I'd discovered alone. The shock, the betrayal, the fear of what they'd planned for me. But now, watching them squirm under the judge's questioning, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Power. "Your Honor," I said quietly, "there's more." Judge Watson nodded grimly. "I suspected there might be. Mr. Henderson, I'm going to call a recess. I want to review this evidence more thoroughly before we proceed, but I want everyone to understand that what we're dealing with here may extend far beyond a simple divorce proceeding." As the judge gathered her papers, Kimberly finally found her voice again. "Clifford, whatever you think you heard or saw, you're wrong. I would never hurt you. We've had our problems, but I'm not a monster." I looked at her, this woman I'd shared more than half my life with, and felt nothing but pity. "No, Kimberly, you're not a monster. Monsters are honest about what they are." During the recess, Martin grabbed Kimberly's arm and pulled her into a corner for a whispered conversation. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but their body language told me everything I needed to know. They were scared, desperate, trying to figure out how much I actually knew. Rachel, meanwhile, kept staring at me like I'd grown a second head. "Clifford," she said, approaching me cautiously, "what exactly is on that video?" I smiled at her, the same kind of cold smile she'd given me earlier when she'd laughed about me dying alone and poor. "You'll find out soon enough, Rachel. We all will." The truth was, even I hadn't expected to feel this satisfied. For months, I'd lived with the knowledge of their betrayal and their plans, feeling helpless and afraid. But now, watching them realize that their perfect scheme was unraveling, I understood what real justice felt like. When Judge Watson returned, her expression was grim. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've reviewed the evidence presented by Mr. Henderson. This court is now suspending divorce proceedings pending a criminal investigation." Kimberly let out a small cry. Martin's face had gone completely gray. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "I'm issuing a restraining order preventing Mrs. Henderson and Mr. Reeves from approaching Mr. Henderson or his residence." But I wasn't done yet. There was still more they needed to know. More secrets that needed to see the light of day. The real shock was still coming. 3 days after the suspended court proceedings, I sat across from Detective Sarah Martinez in a windowless interview room at the police station. The same DVD that had shocked Judge Watson was now evidence in a criminal investigation. Detective Martinez had been reviewing the footage for over an hour, stopping and starting sections, taking notes, occasionally shaking her head in disbelief. "Mr. Henderson," she said finally, setting down her pen and looking at me with a mixture of sympathy and amazement. "In 22 years of police work, I've seen a lot of disturbing things. But this is something else entirely. I had insisted on being present when they reviewed the complete footage. I needed to see their faces when they understood the full scope of what Kimberly and Martin had planned. I needed to witness the moment when their careful facade crumbled completely. The detective rewound the disc to a specific section and turned the monitor so I could see it too. There, in high-definition color, were Kimberly and Martin in my kitchen on a Tuesday afternoon in late April. I had been at work as usual, unaware that they were planning my death in meticulous detail. "The thing about old men with heart conditions," Martin was saying on the recording, "is that everyone expects them to die suddenly. No one questions it." Kimberly nodded, stirring sugar into her coffee with the same spoon she'd used to make my breakfast that morning, especially after the stress of a divorce. The perfect storm, really. Detective Martinez paused the video and looked at me. "How long after your heart attack was this recorded?" "About 8 months, I replied, my voice steady despite the pain of reliving it. "I had the attack in August. This was filmed the following April." She shook her head and resumed the playback. "The next part was even more chilling. The digitalis option is still the cleanest," Martin continued, pulling out his phone and scrolling through what appeared to be medical websites. "It's derived from foxglove plants. Completely natural, grows wild in half the gardens in this neighborhood. In someone with his existing heart condition, it would look like a natural cardiac episode." "How much would we need?" Kimberly asked, leaning closer to read his phone screen. "Not much. A few leaves ground up in his morning coffee over the course of a week. The beauty is that it's cumulative. By the time symptoms appear, it's already in his system at lethal levels." I watched Detective Martinez's jaw clench as she listened to them discuss my murder with the same casual tone they might use to plan a vacation. "There's more," I said quietly. "Keep watching." The scene on the video shifted to show them in our living room later that same day. Martin was holding a manila folder, the same type of folder that had contained our original prenuptial agreement. "I've reviewed the will and the insurance policies," he was telling Kimberly. "Once Clifford is gone, you'll inherit everything. The house, his pension, the life insurance. We're talking about close to $800,000, plus whatever he has in savings. $800,000. That's what my life was worth to them." "And you're certain there won't be any problems with the timing?" Kimberly asked. "I mean, filing for divorce and then having him die so soon after." Martin shrugged. "That's what makes it perfect. Everyone will assume the stress of the divorce caused his heart to give out. Happens all the time with men his age. The coroner won't look too closely at a man with a documented heart condition who just suffered a major life trauma." Detective Martinez stopped the video again. "Mr. Henderson, how did you know to install these cameras? What made you suspicious?" I thought back to that moment, sitting in my truck in the parking lot after discovering their affair. It wasn't suspicion exactly. It was more like survival instinct. After I caught them together, Kimberly became different, colder. She started asking strange questions about my health, my medications, my daily routines. She began insisting on making my coffee every morning, which she'd never done before. "And the cameras?" I told her I was worried about break-ins, which wasn't entirely a lie. I was worried about someone breaking into my life and destroying it. I just didn't realize at the time that they already had. The detective resumed the playback. This next section was the one that had made Judge Watson's face go completely pale in the courtroom. "What about the accident option?" Kimberly was asking. "You mentioned something about his truck." Martin nodded enthusiastically. "Much messier, but potentially faster. Cut the brake lines. Wait for him to drive down that steep hill on his way to work. The curve at the bottom is sharp enough that any vehicle going too fast would go right into the ravine. But what if he survives the crash? At his age, with his health problems? Health? Even if he survived the initial impact, help wouldn't reach him in time. That ravine is 300 feet deep, and cell service is spotty in that area. I had driven that route to work every day for 15 years. They had studied my routines, analyzed my vulnerabilities, planned my death with the precision of military strategists. The insurance investigation would be more thorough with an accident," Martin continued, "but the payout would be the same, and grief-stricken widows aren't usually suspects." Detective Martinez paused the video once more. "Mr. Henderson, when did you first see this footage?" "About 2 weeks after it was recorded," I replied. I had set the system to save everything to a cloud storage account. I was reviewing it to see if I'd captured anything useful for the divorce proceedings when I found this. What was your first reaction? I thought about that moment, sitting alone in my living room at 2 a.m, watching my wife plan my murder. Terror, I said honestly. Pure, absolute terror. Not just because they wanted me dead, but because of how carefully they'd planned it. These weren't passionate, spur-of-the-moment thoughts. This was premeditated, calculated, cold-blooded planning. The detective nodded grimly and started the video again. The final section showed them discussing timelines and alibis. Martin had researched Kimberly's book club schedule, her charity work, her regular appointments. They wanted to ensure she had ironclad alibis for the time period when I would be consuming the digitalis. We should start next Monday, Martin was saying. That gives us the whole week while you're supposedly at your sister's house in Phoenix. You can drive back each morning, dose his coffee, and drive back. Even if someone sees you, you're just a concerned wife checking on your husband during a difficult time. And you'll be where? Chicago, at the medical conference. 300 witnesses who can place me there. Perfect alibi. The video ended with them embracing, celebrating their perfect plan to commit the perfect murder. Detective Martinez ejected the disc and sat back in her chair. Mr. Henderson, do you have any idea how lucky you are? If you hadn't installed those cameras, I'd be dead. I finished for her. I know. There were mornings when I almost drank the coffee Kimberly made for me. Something always stopped me. Call it intuition or paranoia, but I started making my own coffee and pretending to drink hers. What stopped you from drinking it? I thought about those mornings, Kimberly hovering over me with unusual attention, insisting I finish every drop, asking how it tasted. She was trying too hard, I said. For 35 years, Kimberly had never cared whether I finished my coffee or not. Suddenly, she was monitoring every sip. It felt wrong. Detective Martinez leaned forward. There's something else you need to know. We found digitalis plants in your backyard garden. Fresh cuttings. Someone had been harvesting them recently. The room felt cold despite the warm afternoon. They hadn't just been planning my murder. They had already begun executing it. How long do I have before they realize they've been caught? I asked. They already know, she replied. We arrested them both this morning. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe freely. The weight I'd been carrying, the constant fear, the sleepless nights wondering if today would be the day they decided to act, it was finally over. But there was still one more revelation waiting, one final secret that would complete my vindication and their destruction. The call came at 6:30 in the morning, 3 days after my meeting with Detective Martinez. I was sitting in my kitchen, actually enjoying a cup of coffee for the first time in months, when my phone rang. It was my court-appointed attorney, Daniel Walsh, and his voice was filled with an excitement I'd never heard before. Clifford, you need to turn on the local news, he said. Channel 7, right now. I fumbled for the remote control and switched on the television just in time to see a familiar sight that made my heart race. There was my house, my front yard, surrounded by police cars with their red and blue lights flashing. A reporter was standing at the end of my driveway, speaking into a microphone with the kind of serious expression reserved for major crime stories. We're here at the Henderson residence where police have arrested 2 suspects in connection with an alleged murder plot, the reporter was saying. Kimberly Henderson, 64, and Martin Reeves, 45, were taken into custody this morning on charges of conspiracy to commit murder. I watched in stunned silence as they showed footage of Kimberly being led away in handcuffs. She wasn't the composed, confident woman who had laughed at me in the courtroom just days earlier. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared, and she looked every one of her 64 years. Martin followed behind her, his expensive suit wrinkled, his hands cuffed behind his back. According to police sources, the reporter continued, the alleged plot involved poisoning the victim using digitalis, a substance derived from foxglove plants. The investigation began after the victim presented video evidence to family court during divorce proceedings. Video evidence. My video evidence. The same footage that had shocked Judge Watson was now being discussed on the morning news. My phone rang again. This time it was Rachel, Kimberly's cousin, the same woman who had laughed about me dying alone and poor just days earlier. Clifford, her voice was shaky, desperate. This has to be some kind of mistake. Kimberly would never actually hurt you. She's not capable of murder. I almost laughed at the irony. Rachel, you were there when she was planning to leave me with nothing. You laughed when you said I'd die alone. Did it never occur to you that she might be planning to make that happen sooner rather than later? There was silence on the other end of the line. Then, in a voice much smaller than the one that had mocked me in the courtroom, she whispered, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. Maybe you didn't know about the murder plot, I replied. But you knew she was planning to destroy me financially. You celebrated it. The only difference is the method. I hung up before she could respond. I had no interest in her guilt or her excuses. Over the next few hours, my phone didn't stop ringing. Reporters wanting interviews, neighbors expressing shock, distant relatives who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly concerned about my well-being. I ignored most of them, but there was one call I did take. It was from Thomas Muller, an attorney I'd never heard of before. His voice was professional but warm, and he had information that would change everything once again. Mr. Henderson, I represent the estate of your late uncle, Frederick Henderson, he said. I've been trying to reach you for several months, but it appears your wife may have been intercepting our correspondence. Uncle Frederick. I hadn't heard that name in over a decade. He was my father's older brother, a man who had made his fortune in real estate and had never married. I'd met him only a handful of times at family reunions, and he'd always seemed like a distant, somewhat eccentric figure. I'm afraid I don't understand, I said. What correspondence? Mr. Henderson, your uncle passed away 8 months ago. He left you a substantial inheritance, but according to our records, all our letters were returned marked addressee unknown, or moved, no forwarding address. My blood ran cold 8 months ago, right around the time Kimberly had started asking strange questions about my daily routines, right around the time she'd begun insisting on bringing in the mail every day. How substantial, I asked, though I was already beginning to understand the full scope of Kimberly and Martin's plan. $4.2 million, Mr. Henderson, plus a property portfolio valued at approximately $6 million more. $10 million. I sat down heavily in my kitchen chair, my mind reeling. Uncle Frederick had left me $10 million, and Kimberly had hidden it from me while planning my murder. There's more, Attorney Muller continued. Your uncle's will specifically states that the inheritance is to be placed in an irrevocable trust if you predecease your wife. In that case, the money would go to various charities, and your wife would receive nothing. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. Kimberly and Martin hadn't just been planning to inherit my modest $800,000 estate. They had known about Uncle Frederick's inheritance and had been racing against time to kill me before I could claim it. Mr. Muller, I said slowly, when exactly did my uncle's will go through probate? The will was read 6 months ago, Mr. Henderson. We sent notification letters to your address beginning in February. February, the same month Kimberly had started making my coffee every morning. The same month Martin had begun researching digitalis poisoning and brake line sabotage. I told Attorney Muller about the intercepted mail, about the murder plot, about everything that had happened. He listened in shocked silence, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Mr. Henderson, he said finally, I need to ask you something important. During the time when these letters were being sent to your house, did your wife show any unusual interest in your mail or your daily routines? I thought back to those months, remembering how Kimberly had suddenly become the household's unofficial mail sorter. How she'd started asking detailed questions about my work schedule, my driving routes, my medication times. She controlled everything, I realized out loud. The mail, my schedule, even my food and drink. She was positioning herself to kill me the moment she figured out how to access the inheritance. Fortunately, Attorney Muller said, your uncle was very specific about the trust provisions. Even if their plan had succeeded, your wife would never have seen a penny of his money. That afternoon, I met with Attorney Muller at his downtown office. The building was impressive, all marble and mahogany, the kind of place I'd never imagined having business in. He was a distinguished man in his 70s with silver hair and the kind of expensive suit that spoke of decades of successful legal practice. Before we proceed with the inheritance transfer, he said, I want you to understand exactly what your uncle left you. He spread several documents across his polished conference table, property deeds, investment portfolios, bank statements, all bearing my name as the sole beneficiary. The liquid assets total $4.2 million, he explained, pointing to various bank statements. The properties include a vacation home in Colorado, a rental property complex in Austin, and a small office building in downtown Denver. Conservative estimate puts the total value at just over $10 million. $10 million. I stared at the numbers, trying to comprehend what this meant for my life. Just days ago, I'd been facing the prospect of poverty and homelessness. Now I was a millionaire 10 times over. There's something else, Attorney Mueller continued, producing another document. Your uncle included a personal letter for you. He handed me an envelope with my name written in shaky handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message that brought tears to my eyes. Dear Clifford, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're finally free of that woman you married. I never liked her, never trusted her, but I kept my mouth shut because you seemed happy. I hope this money helps you build the life you deserve, away from people who don't appreciate your worth. Use it wisely, and remember that family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the people who choose to stand by you when the blood relatives fail you. With love and respect, Uncle Frederick. Somehow, even from beyond the grave, Uncle Frederick had seen what I'd been too blind to notice. He'd known what kind of person Kimberly was, and he'd structured his will to protect both me and his money from her greed. Mr. Henderson, Attorney Mueller said gently, are you ready to claim your inheritance? I looked up from the letter, thinking about everything that had brought me to this moment. The betrayal, the fear, the months of living with the knowledge that the woman I'd loved for 35 years was planning my death. Yes, I said firmly, I'm ready. Outside the attorney's office, I sat in my truck for a long time, looking at the city skyline and thinking about the future. For the first time in months, I wasn't afraid. Kimberly and Martin were in jail, facing charges that would likely put them away for decades. I was alive, I was free, and I was wealthy beyond my wildest dreams. But the story wasn't quite over yet. There was still one more surprise waiting for me. One final twist that would make this victory complete. 2 years have passed since that day in the courtroom when Judge Watson opened my envelope and changed everything. As I write this, I'm sitting on the deck of my uncle's vacation home in Colorado, surrounded by mountain peaks and the kind of peace I never thought I'd experience again. The morning air is crisp and clean, nothing like the suffocating atmosphere of the house I shared with Kimberly for 35 years. The legal proceedings move faster than anyone expected. Faced with overwhelming video evidence of their murder conspiracy, both Kimberly and Martin accepted plea bargains rather than risk trial. Kimberly received 15 years for conspiracy to commit murder and attempted poisoning. Martin got 20 years for the same charges, plus additional counts of fraud and identity theft that the investigation uncovered. I never saw either of them again after their arrest. I had no desire to watch them in court or to hear whatever excuses they might offer. Detective Martinez kept me informed of the proceedings, but I was content to let justice take its course without my direct involvement. The divorce was finalized in absentia while Kimberly was in county jail awaiting sentencing. Under the circumstances, the prenuptial agreement was voided due to her criminal conduct, though it hardly mattered anymore. She was entitled to nothing from me, and with her criminal record, she'd lost any claim to respectability or sympathy. Rachel, Kimberly's cousin who had laughed so cruelly about my impending poverty, called me several times in the weeks following the arrests. She wanted to apologize, to explain that she'd never known about the murder plot, to somehow make amends for her part in my humiliation. I listened to her voicemails but never returned her calls. Some betrayals don't deserve forgiveness, and some people don't deserve second chances. The inheritance process took several months to complete, but Attorney Mueller proved to be as competent as he was kind. He helped me navigate the complex world of wealth management, introducing me to financial advisors and tax specialists who could help protect and grow Uncle Frederick's generous gift. I kept the vacation home in Colorado and the rental properties in Austin, but I sold the office building in Denver. The profits from that sale, combined with careful investing, brought my net worth to just over $12 million. It's more money than I ever dreamed of having, and certainly more than I need. I used some of the money to fulfill a dream I'd abandoned decades ago. I bought a small fishing boat and spent 6 months traveling the Great Lakes, something I'd always wanted to do but could never afford during my working years. The solitude was healing, the vastness of the water helping to wash away years of betrayal and pain. But the most important change in my life didn't come from money or travel. It came from Eleanor. I met her at a community center in Durango, a small town near my Colorado home. She was leading a grief support group for people who had lost their spouses, and while my situation was different from the others, I was certainly grieving the death of my marriage and the person I'd thought Kimberly was. Eleanor was 72, a retired teacher whose husband had died of cancer 3 years earlier. She had warm brown eyes, silver hair she wore in a practical bob, and a laugh that reminded me of sunshine. Unlike Kimberly, who had always been concerned with appearances and status, Eleanor was genuinely kind, interested in books and gardening and helping others. We became friends first, bonding over our shared love of fishing and our similar experiences of loss. She'd been married to her husband for 46 years, and unlike my marriage, theirs had been genuinely happy until the end. Listening to her talk about real love, about partnership and mutual respect, helped me understand what I'd been missing all those years with Kimberly. Our friendship slowly deepened into something more. Eleanor knew about my past, about the murder plot and the inheritance, but she loved me for who I was, not what I had. When I asked her to marry me last Christmas, sitting by the fireplace in the Colorado cabin with snow falling outside, she said yes, without hesitation. We had a simple wedding in the mountains, just the two of us and a justice of the peace. No expensive flowers, no designer gowns, no pretentious guests. Just two people who had found love and companionship in the second half of their lives, promising to be honest and kind to each other for whatever time we had left. Eleanor moved into the Colorado house with me, bringing her books and her gardening tools and her gentle presence that makes every day brighter. We spend our mornings fishing, our afternoons reading, and our evenings cooking together and talking about everything and nothing. I think about Kimberly sometimes, wondering if she ever reflects on the choices that led her to a prison cell instead of the wealthy widow's life she'd planned. The irony isn't lost on me that if she'd simply been patient, if she'd waited for me to die naturally in perhaps 10 or 15 years, she would have inherited everything legitimately. Her greed and impatience destroyed her more thoroughly than any revenge I could have planned. Martin, according to the newspaper reports I occasionally read, is not adjusting well to prison life. A financial consultant accustomed to expensive suits and fine dining isn't popular among his fellow inmates. I feel no sympathy for him. He chose to participate in a plan to murder an innocent man for money. Now he's learning that actions have consequences. 6 months ago, I received an unexpected visitor at the Colorado house. Detective Martinez was in the area for a conference and stopped by to see how I was doing. She told me that my case had become legendary in law enforcement circles, used as an example of how domestic violence can escalate to murder plots and how careful documentation can save lives. "You know," she said as we sat on my deck overlooking the mountains, "in all my years of police work, I've never seen a case where the intended victim was so well prepared to defend himself. Those security cameras didn't just save your life. They probably prevented them from killing someone else down the road." I hadn't thought about it that way, but she was right. Kimberly and Martin had planned my murder with such cold calculation that they would have certainly killed again if the opportunity arose. By exposing them, I'd not only saved my own life, but potentially the lives of future victims. Eleanor joined us for dinner that evening, and Detective Martinez was charmed by her warmth and intelligence. As the detective was leaving, she pulled me aside for a private word. "Clifford," she said, "I've seen a lot of victims over the years, and most of them struggle to rebuild their lives after trauma like what you experienced. But you've done something remarkable. You've not just survived, you've thrived. That's not common." I thought about her words for a long time after she left. She was right that I'd thrived, but it hadn't been easy. The first year after the arrests was difficult, filled with nightmares and trust issues and the constant fear that somehow Kimberly and Martin might find a way to hurt me even from prison. But gradually, with Eleanor's help and my own determination to not let their evil define the rest of my life, I'd found peace. Real peace, not the false calm I'd mistaken for happiness during my marriage to Kimberly. This morning, as I finish writing this account, Eleanor is in the garden planting tomatoes for our summer harvest. She's humming an old song, completely content with our simple life. In a few minutes, I'll join her, and we'll work together in the soil, planning for a future that stretches ahead of us bright with possibility. The money Uncle Frederick left me has certainly made life easier, but it's not what saved me. What saved me was the decision to trust my instincts, to document the truth, and to refuse to be a victim. What healed me was learning the difference between a marriage built on manipulation and control and a relationship based on genuine love and respect. At 68 years old, I'm finally living the life I was meant to have. It took betrayal, attempted murder, and the complete destruction of everything I thought I knew about my past to get here, but I wouldn't change anything, because without that darkness, I never would have appreciated this light. Sometimes justice takes time, but when it finally arrives, it's sweeter than any revenge could ever be. And sometimes when you lose everything you thought mattered, you discover something infinitely more valuable: the chance to start over and get it right.